for inviting me to this space. I'm going to dive straight into it. So my topic is adaptive learning, right? And in my view, this is me putting a stick in the ground. I believe that the pursuit of knowledge should be a meaningful process that is sourced and resourced from a place of love, where the holistic experience of the teacher and the learner is reciprocal, it's empowering, it's dynamic. I think you can tell that I subscribe to Paulo Freire's philosophy that education is indeed an act of love, a practice of freedom, and thus an act of courage. I also understand, as per Freire, that this process or this pursuit of this knowledge can also be riddled with a sense of restlessness, of discomfort and challenge. For creatives and entrepreneurs especially, I think this process is further underscored by a level of pressure and complexity, as well as that big word, fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of not making an impact, fear of being excluded, and in my case, a severe type of FOMO. Yes, that is hashtag the fear of missing out. I consider myself a multi-hyphenate and even, refer to myself as a slasher. But it wasn't until recently when I realized that this notion actually doesn't stem from the place that the fact that I celebrate my sense of multidimensionality and multifacetedness, but it also comes from a place that actually reminded me that as a Black child whose schooling was sourced and resourced by the entire community, I have never actually had the option to fail. So stillness and silence weren't a sign of rest, but rather this thing around complacency. For example, between primary school and university, I did a lot. I did academics, I sang in the choir, I did sport. In high school, I did maths, science, accounting, biology, cheerleading, netball. In university, for example, I took television studies, I did media studies, drama, applied theater, musical theater, and like I mentioned earlier, I realized that this pressure actually comes from a place of fear. So I graduated in 2011, and for the first time, I think in my life, I got the opportunity to focus on one thing. I applied at this university and got a full scholarship to be able to do a course in cultural policy management. I remember having to pinch myself throughout that entire journey, realizing that for the first time, I didn't have to stress about pressure from home or pressure around resources or having my student card blocked. Prior to that, I had spent time, seeking fame and fortune, facilitating workshops in schools, and even playing host to the Barney show. After several shows of what felt like a million times singing, "If you're happy and clap your hands," I realized that I was simply not happy. So being in this lecture hall, in seminars, I had to pinch myself while I was doing my master's, reminding myself that yes, you, Barney's friend, are finally occupying a seat at this table, being able to contribute to concepts and discussions around cultural policy, arts advocacy, audience development, and. This was really a place for me to really start to see myself as something beyond just a mascot, but something that was starting to be a master in a particular field. By night, I was rehearsing and working with a sketch comedy collective that I co-founded called Thanks with Kitty, Momo, and Zetu. We quickly realized that our degrees in performing arts were not necessarily going to help us, achieve the goals of fame and fortune. So we conceptualized and co-created a space where we could find our own voice, create our own work, and in some instances, to put food on the table. During our rehearsals and our night sessions, we used to take time to really explore learnings from our different experiences. We used that time to practice new skills and to share new learnings. In this space, each one of us had an opportunity to be seen, to try out new things, and to almost wear new shoes or new hats of different things that they wanted to be in the world. So I realized that my story is not necessarily unique. Many of us as creatives and social entrepreneurs have been put in a place where at some point you've had to make the trade-off between fulfilling your basic needs as per Maslow's pyramid or working towards building your highest self-actualized self, right? So this process or this notion of adaptive learning is not new to us. It is us. When you think about different other sectors, the CQ, EQ, AQ levels cannot match the kind of work that we do. AQ, as per Natalie Fatro, is the adaptability potential or the ability to adapt. And ladies and gentlemen, we as creatives and social entrepreneurs, if you look up that word, adaptability potential, it describes who we are. Our work has constantly involved a sense of contemplating, interrogating, rethinking, flipping things on their heads, performing miracles in some instances with limited budgets or ever-changing goalposts. And while I think it's not a bad thing, I think we should not underplay just how demanding and difficult this entire process can be. The fact that it can be lonely, you sitting by yourself wondering if the work that you have presented is valuable, is meaningful, is impactful. So what do we know right now? The Sankofa teachings suggest that if we want to move forward, we need to look back into our past to understand how we became who we are before we can really think about where we want to go. What I described earlier is the concept or philosophy of Ubuntu in action. I am because we are. Or as the famous late prophetess Brenda Fassie put it, Umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu. The custom or tradition that says, how can we build individuals and collectives or communities for mutual benefit? Spaces where we leverage our interconnectedness and interdependence. This can be seen in various communities and townships across, Africa, where communities deliberately come together to support a family who's grieving or celebrating. In the case of my journey, I guess, with the Thanks, the sketch collective that I belonged to, that's an extension of what Ubuntu has looked like in my life. Space where we each had an opportunity to share in our celebrations, in our joy, but also in our mourning and in our grief. In fact, we had a song that says, "Make it the Manyalo Lima Fu," which means events, weddings, and funerals. The idea that we can hold space for one another in different types of contexts. If it wasn't for COVID-19, I believe that the sketch comedy collective might have changed the world through comedy. And I realized that many other collectives, startups, businesses, ideas have had to be disrupted or even paused because of this pandemic. And I've been wondering, in the past year, how do we hold space for that host, that co-founder, that leader, that manager, that creator of that particular hub, of that particular startup, of that particular collective, when they don't have capacity? How do we hold space for one another when the very thing that helps us to thrive, the sense of community and communion, has been disrupted? Yes, digital technologies have been able to facilitate a level of connection, but we cannot underplay just how much this has impacted our level of trust, the way in which we engage with each other, and the way in which we hold space for each other. A few days ago, I found out that one of our participants in our skills development programs had transcended. After 2 months, it finally dawned on us that the fact that this person wasn't, responding or engaging in our WhatsApp check-ins wasn't because she was no longer interested, but it's because she had transcended, and it took us 2 whole months. I think about many other people who've been kicked off the radar simply because they have no access to these spaces or literally no capacity. So in thinking about this adaptive learning culture and thinking about moving on, how do we preserve the very thing that helps us to thrive? Community. Well, I also think that it starts with a mapping of our individual resources, the abundant resources that we all possess, and connecting with each other, understanding, embracing, and leveraging of the inherent power to adapt. I think it is also about mapping our needs and our fears and thinking about how these can actually be met. Sometimes knowing what you don't have might be a pathway towards creating that thing. At a collective level, I think it's about leveraging off of these individual resources and creating spaces where they cater for this nuance and this diversity. I was so excited when I heard that at the 2020 summit, 3 major values were endorsed or even celebrated or outlined: magic, repair and sustainability, and courageous commitment. Like a prophecy, these values really remind us to fight hard to keep our spirits alive. But beyond that, to really think about how we're going to move forward in spite of the grief, the despair, and the uncertainty. As Alice Walker says, we are the ones we've been waiting for, experts of our own lived experiences. So I guess the challenge here is really about how do we create spaces where this magic can happen, where this repair and sustainability can be prioritized, and where we can remain committed and dedicated to ourselves and each other. What I'd like to offer today is not something different. I don't believe that there are new ideas under the sun, but I think these are 3 key pillars that can serve as vines that connect these shared values. Pillar number 1 is curiosity. So in 2017, on New Year's Eve, I gave birth to a little girl. And for the past 3 years, I've been energized when I look at my daughter, who looks at life with a sense of awe and wonder and expectation. I'm energized by how fun her learning process has been, and sometimes feel a little bit jealous that I might never be able to see life from that unfiltered, pure lens. In retrospect, I also think about last year when the pandemic hit, how we were so stuck in asking why questions instead of asking more interesting, open-ended questions like, who else? Where else? What is this? How do we flip it around? How do we change it around? How do we even adapt it? If we want to achieve this magic, this repair and sustainability, then we need to have curiosity at the center, creating brave and safe spaces where we're really excited about our successes and our failures, where we are open and prioritize a sense of evolution for the individual and the collective. Pillar number 2 is around competence. For me, this speaks about ways in which we can develop our existing competencies and skills, but also thinking about how we develop new ones. Competence also, in my head, speaks about how we create spaces where we intentionally cultivate interdisciplinary collisions and cross-sectoral engagements that empower and equip, where we think about agile, Afrocentric models and systems that allow us to document and archive our evolution, exploration, adaptation as it happens in real time. Unlike us, our future generations and grandchildren should not have to fight to be included in Eurocentric institutions where they can't even reference their ancestors. Yes, I'm very, very grateful for the experience I gained at Wits University, but I really, if I'm being very honest, the learning actually happened outside of the classroom. It happened in informal spaces, at festivals, independent spaces where we were deliberately challenging Western canons and developing new ones that matter, that make us matter, that allow us to cultivate, package, position our own value as African creatives and African entrepreneurs. The last one is around care. I think we can all agree that choosing a career, or when a career in the creative sector or entrepreneurship chooses you, it's a challenging gig. Spaces where we are constantly reflecting the times, serving communities, wanting to answer questions, complex questions. I think in thinking about care, I'm not talking about a capitalist kind of superficial way of achieving this care where, we're lighting candlelight or taking salt baths. No. I'm talking about policies and strategies and systems that look at repair and sustainability for the individuals, that also look at how we can reframe what productivity looks like, that challenge the very problematic and unsustainable ways that we have since normalized. The idea of overworking, of constantly being exhausted, of pouring from empty cups and neglecting our mental health. In thinking about care, we need to come up with, a structure where each one of us, whether you're a hub, a space, a founder, a creative, an ideator, a collaborator, can have a moment to receive and give that support. In thinking about this talk, I was wondering, what has kept me alive? And honestly, it has been the collective. It's 2021. I now belong to a collective called the Bounce Back Ensemble, a brave, brilliant space with Jeff, and Faye, where each one of us is witnessed, supported, and celebrated as we move from cave to spotlight, where we are able to bounce back ideas, bounce back new ways of thinking and creating that are sustainable, that are magical, that are wholesome. In closing, I want to honor each of our own pursuits of this knowledge, knowing that sometimes it can be underscored by love or fear. I want to challenge each one of us to think about what we are able and willing to share with the ecosystem and the collective, but also to be brave enough to reach out when there are those fears, those needs that need to be met. In cultivating this new culture, how might we hold space for the love moments? And how might we remain curious and excited about where fear and failure may lead? Thank you.